Good Sunday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for November the 19th. Today we are reading together in 2 Chronicles chapter 30, which is going to be another step of restoration that Hezekiah is going to spearhead among the people of Judah, and even drawing in some of the leftovers from Israel after they've been taken away into captivity. He's going to draw the people together to observe the Passover, which we're going to see as we read through the text. Doesn't seem to be something that they were doing like they ought to have done, but they recognize, Hezekiah does, that this is something that is good and necessary in order to honor God and to show faithfulness to the covenant. So he's going to do what he can to get this going back up again. So let's read about that. Push the wrong buttons completely. 2 Chronicles chapter 30. 2 Chronicles chapter 30. Second Chronicles chapter 30 and verse number 1. Then Hezekiah sent word throughout all Israel and Judah, and he also wrote letters to Ephraim and Manasseh to come to Yahweh's temple in Jerusalem to observe the Passover of Yahweh, the God of Israel. For the king and his officials and the entire congregation in Jerusalem decided to observe the Passover of Yahweh in the second month, because they were not able to observe it at the appropriate time. Not enough of the priests had consecrated themselves, and the people hadn't been gathered together in Jerusalem. The proposal pleased the king and the congregation, so they affirmed the proposal and spread the message throughout all Israel, from Beersheba to Dan, to come to observe the Passover of Yahweh, the God of Israel, in Jerusalem, for they hadn't observed it often as prescribed. So the couriers went through Israel and Judah with letters from the hand of the king and his officials, and according to the king's command, saying, Israelites, return to Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, so that he may return to those who remain, who have escaped the grasp of the kings of Assyria. Don't be like your ancestors and your brothers who were unfaithful to Yahweh, the God of their ancestors, so that he made them an object of horror, as you yourselves see. Don't become obstinate now like your ancestors did. Give your allegiance to Yahweh and come to his sanctuary that he has consecrated forever. Serve Yahweh your God, so that he may turn his burning anger away from you. For when you return to Yahweh, your brothers and your sons will receive mercy in the presence of their captors and will return to this land. For Yahweh your God is gracious and merciful, and he will not turn his face away from you if you return to him. Verse number 10, the couriers traveled from city to city in the land of Ephraim and Manasseh as far as Zebulun, but the inhabitants laughed at them and mocked them. But some from Asher, Manasseh, and Zebulun humbled themselves and came to Jerusalem. Also, the power of God was at work in Judah to unite them to carry out the command of the king and his officials by the word of Yahweh. A very large assembly of people was gathered in Jerusalem to observe the festival of unleavened bread in the second month. They proceeded to take away the altars that were in Jerusalem, and they took away the incense altars and threw them into the Kidron Valley. They slaughtered the Passover lamb on the 14th day of the second month. The priests and Levites were ashamed, and they consecrated themselves and brought burnt offerings to Yahweh's temple. They stood at their prescribed posts according to the law of Moses, the man of God. The priest splattered the blood received from the Levites, for there were many in the assembly who had not consecrated themselves. And so the Levites were in charge of slaughtering the Passover lambs for every unclean person, to consecrate the lambs to Yahweh. A large number of the people, many from Ephraim, Manasseh, Issachar, and Zebulun, were ritually unclean. Yet they had eaten the Passover contrary to what was written. But Hezekiah had interceded for them, saying, May the good Yahweh provide atonement on behalf of whoever sets his whole heart on seeking God, Yahweh, the God of their ancestors, or the God of his ancestors, even though not according to the purification rules of the sanctuary. So Yahweh heard Hezekiah and healed the people. The Israelites who were present in Jerusalem observed the festival of unleavened bread 7 days with great joy. And the Levites and the priests praised Yahweh day after day with loud instruments. Then Hezekiah encouraged all the Levites who performed skillfully before the Lord. They ate at the appointed festival for 7 days, sacrificing fellowship offerings and giving thanks to Yahweh, the God of their ancestors. The whole congregation decided to observe 7 more days, so they observed 7 days with joy. For King Hezekiah of Judah contributed 1,000 bulls and 7,000 sheep for the congregation. Also, the officials contributed 1,000 bulls and 10,000 sheep for the congregation, and many priests consecrated themselves. And the whole assembly of Judah, with the priests and Levites, the whole assembly that came from Israel, the resident aliens who came from the land of Israel, and those who were living in Judah, rejoiced. There was great rejoicing in Jerusalem, for nothing like this was known in the days since the days of Solomon, son of David, the king of Israel. Then the priests and the Levites stood to bless the people, and God heard them, and their prayer came into his holy dwelling place in heaven. And that is 2 Chronicles chapter 30. Again, the reinstitution of the Passover observance, which, if I'm understanding this correctly, doesn't seem to have been done since the days of Solomon. Is that what verse 26 is telling us? There was great rejoicing in Jerusalem, for nothing like this was known since the days of Solomon, son of David, and the king of Israel. Is that referencing nothing like this in regard to the Passover, or just a general exclamation of worship? I'm not really sure. What we do know is what is said in verse number 5, that they had not observed it often as prescribed, or they had not observed it often according to what is written. The Passover was something that was supposed to be observed every first month of the year. Remember, whenever they came out of Israel, their calendar, or excuse me, whenever they came out of Egypt, their calendar was reset to start at the time they came out. And in that first month, they were to observe the Passover. However, there was a provision within the law in Numbers 9 and verses 9 through 11 that it could be held a month later if there were issues of some sort. And that was the case here whenever Hezekiah recognized the need to observe the Passover of Yahweh. Again, the seminal events in the history of Israel, in the fact that Yahweh finished off basically Egypt and through the Exodus story and through the plagues with the Passover of the destroyer, as the destroyer went out over the land of Egypt. Of course, those who were not faithful to Yahweh and who had not put the blood over the doorpost, the firstborn of that household was killed. But God, the destroyer would see the blood of the lamb that the Israelites had placed over the doorway, and God then spared them from the destroyer and allowed them then by his power to come out of Egypt. So that's what this is remembering, the deliverance of God over Egypt and the faithfulness of Yahweh to his people to provide them a way of escape there, in order to, again, not experience the death that the destroyer brought during that particular during that night, and within the context of the story of the Exodus. So they are to remember this, and to remember again the great deliverance that God had given them, and everything that came as a result of that. But they hadn't been doing this. So whenever you recognize that they need to do this, they actually don't have enough time to prep to be able to do it in the first month. So they take advantage of the provision that is mentioned in Numbers chapter 9 to be able to observe it in the second month. But notice that Hezekiah doesn't just want to involve those belonging to Judah. He actually sends couriers throughout the entire land of Israel. The text says they went from Beersheba, which is far down in the south, all the way to Dan, which is way up in the north. And they invited even the leftovers. Remember, by this time in history, Israel, the northern tribes, they've been taken away into captivity by the Assyrians. But those who are left over, he invites them to come and to participate in this observance of the Passover. But some don't. In fact, what they do is, the text says, they laughed and they mocked the couriers that were coming with this message of come participate with us. Remember, they were telling them, don't be obstinate like your fathers had been. Don't make the same mistakes your ancestors had made, but come and observe this and participate in this wonderful event of observing the Passover. Some laughed and mocked, but others, the text says, humbled themselves, and they did come to Jerusalem. And the text tells us a beautiful statement that the power of God was at work in Judah to unite them. to carry out the command of the king and his officials by the word of Yahweh. So where the nation had been ripped apart through wickedness and selfishness of kings for over the last many years, now God was seeking to reunite them, and it was all on the basis of what would have kept them really together in the first place, that they would have been humble, that they would have been faithful to Yahweh and shown loyalty to the covenants. But now there is humility being seen, and through that they're going to come together, this large assembly of people in the second month. They come together and they're going to observe this Passover. There's consecration that is needed for many people. The unclean, there were sacrifices made for them. But then we have this interesting note, verse 18, that a number of the people, those from Ephraim, Manasseh, and Issachar, Zebulun, they were ritually unclean, and yet they had eaten the Passover in a way that was contrary to what was written. What had Hezekiah done? Again, Hezekiah's concern here is for the honor of God, and those who might have been eating the Passover in an unclean way did not honor God. So he implored God on their behalf that he might provide atonement for them, that you please recognize that they are seeking to serve you with their entire hearts. Maybe there was maybe they just did not understand that they were ritually unclean. They did not know that was something that had to be done. And their concern was just to serve God and to participate in this thing that Hezekiah had invited them to do. So Hezekiah asked for mercy on their part, and the text says that Yahweh heard Hezekiah and he healed the people. He did. He extended to them grace and mercy so that they could do what they were doing. And there was just this great festival of the observance of the Passover. The festival of unleavened bread was something that was observed as well. And I want to note that throughout this text, we see that there was great joy, that being able to do this, being able to come together to observe and to remember what the Passover was and what it represented, and just the joy that came with these holy feasts that were appointed for the people. This led to great joy among the people. There was great joy. There was encouragement toward those who were performing skillfully of the Levites. There was a great deal of fellowship offerings that were being given. There was thanks that was being given. So much so that they even decided to observe 7 more days. It was such an enjoyable and uplifting time that they want to do it for another week. And Hezekiah obliges that and sends thousands of additional sacrifices to be made. The priests are continually consecrating themselves, and the whole assembly, those from Judah, the priests, the Levites, those from Israel, those resident aliens, those who were living in Judah, again, they rejoiced. And there was great rejoicing, for once again, nothing had been done like this since the time of Solomon. And think about it, just this whole idea of there being a restoration back to what should have been. This is especially a message that was very pertinent to those who were receiving the Chronicles, those who were coming back from exile, much like those in Israel, and those who had not been able to participate in all the things that God had designated that they do throughout the year, to remember who he was and what he had done for them and the tremendous position that they were in as God's chosen people. They're coming back from exile now, and they're being reminded that this is who you are to be, and this is what you are to do, because this is who God is. So for them, reading this story of restoration back to what should have been the norm, this would give great encouragement to those who were a part of the post-exilic period, that they recognize, hey, we haven't been able to do these things either. We need to get back to them as well. We see that this is something that has been done in the past, where things have been restored to where they need to be. We too can do that. We can restore things to what is supposed to be the norm for God's people. So they would take this story, they would see that as possible, and that could move them and motivate them to do the exact same thing in their own context. We just think about ourselves too. The reality is there might be things in our lives that need to be restored too. Things need to get back to the way that they ought to be. Don't just ignore those things. Don't give hope and think that they cannot be done, that mistakes in the past are going to absolutely dictate what is in our present and what's in our future. No, if we recognize there's something we have not been doing, or if we recognize there is some effort in some area in our lives that has not been made, don't pout over that, and don't become discouraged to the point of not doing anything. Make the necessary changes. Do what's necessary. Humble ourselves. That's one of the things we see in this text, that there needs to be humility. And then we also see that there needs to be this desire to seek God with our whole heart. Those two things together, if there is a true desire to seek God with our whole heart, and if there is a true humility about us, then I feel very confident that we can, even if it hasn't been done previously, we can right here, right now, beginning now, we can be what God would have us to be. So let's take encouragement from this text here of 2 Chronicles chapter 30 to recognize that even if something has been left undone in the past, we can start right here, right now, doing what we need to be doing. If you have any questions or comments about this text here in 2 Chronicles 30, please feel free to leave that in the comment section below. And I do appreciate you taking some time reading along with me on this Sunday morning. We're looking forward to being together here in just a little bit for our Bible study and worship assembly. We're going to be continuing our study through the Gospel of Mark and looking at a few scenes from Mark's Gospel that focus on the idea of spiritual blindness. Spiritual blindness. I think there's a lot for us to learn from this text in Mark chapter 8 and verses 11 through 26. And I'm looking forward to studying that with you here in just a little bit. Again, thanks for tuning in today. Have a great rest of your Lord's Day, and hope you'll be back again tomorrow as we read together through 2 Chronicles chapter 31. Take care, and God bless.